give you your papers today. Someone remind me, like 2 minutes before the bell's supposed to ring, be like, Ms. Elba, give us our papers. Okay, so political parties. I'm really excited that we're talking about political parties right now, because in the world of political parties and our current events, a lot is going on. So obviously we're in a presidential candidate election, which means that political parties are at the forefront, especially of current events. But in another story, in the Republican Party, 2 candidates who are running under the Republican Party ticket last week announced that they may be leaving the party and going elsewhere by still running. Donald Trump he signed a pledge, but he's made a lot of noises about if the Republican Party doesn't support him fully, he's gonna leave, which he can do. But then Ben Carson last week on Friday announced that he would leave the Republican Party if they didn't get their act together and sort of call this kind of extremist language that's happening in the Muslim world against Muslims. And so it will be interesting to see what happens because there are a lot of big things that will happen if someone leaves, one of the 2 major parties and splits off. And that will be part of your debate on Friday. Okay. Before I get into this, we need to define a couple of things. What are political parties? Political parties are made up of people who use the organization, the resources, and the access to power that parties provide to influence the outcomes of government. So political parties are made up of people who use the organization, resources, and access to power that the parties provide in order to influence the outcomes of government. We also call political parties factions. If you can think back to Federalist 10, when we looked at the Federalist Papers, they talked about factions. The thing you really need to understand here is that political parties are not ever discussed in the Constitution. Our founders never imagined that our political system would be divided by political parties, okay? So one of the biggest misconceptions about government is that people believe that there's something about Republicans or Democrats or parties in the Constitution. Nowhere in the Constitution do they talk about political parties. Political parties was a system that we developed as a society, but we developed it almost immediately after the Constitution was put into place. So it's not new, but it is not part of our government. It's not in the foundation of our government. The other misconception is that people believe political parties and interest groups are the same. They'll kind of interchange those terms. That's incorrect. Political parties organize and operate government. Political parties, especially when we get into Congress, you're going to realize political parties have a great deal of power in the day-to-day operations of government. Depending on what party you're in, if you're in the majority or the minority, you are in different committees, you are maybe a committee chair, you have a lot more, power depending on what party you're in. Interest groups simply just try to influence government, but they don't operate in government. They don't make decisions in government at all. We also need to talk about the functions of political parties. There are 5 of them. I'm going to go through them very briefly. Please read about them in your book. There are 5 major functions of a political party. First is that they recruit candidates to run for political office under their party label. They recruit candidates to run for public office under their party label. This means that they will look into their party, find some of their leaders, and they'll often encourage those leaders to run. So things like Barack Obama. Barack Obama was kind of chosen by the Democratic Party as a leader. Main driving force for how our elections continue to function. They get door-to-door materials out to people. They educate voters. They let voters know when voting day is. They get out the vote campaigns going, registering people to vote. Political parties do all of those things for us in terms of running elections. Without political parties, there wouldn't be a whole lot of motivation for people to go and vote and be in part inactive in it, because a lot of people do that because of their party. Number 3, they present alternative policies to the electorate. So political parties do serve a purpose in the fact that we then debate. We don't just take things for what they are. We take a look at the alternative policies that these political parties give us, and we decide, okay, what do I agree with most? What feels most like a fit to my personal ideas? They provide that conversation rather than just having to accept what one party, if we were only in one party system, would tell us. They accept responsibility for operating the government. When their party is in the majority, they accept responsibility. When the government isn't working well, typically the party doesn't look good. Or when the party doesn't look good, government doesn't look good. So they go hand in hand. It's why people right now in the Republican Party are so nervous, because they feel like if you don't think that the Republican Party in its candidacy, how it's choosing its candidate for president right now, if you don't think they're doing a very good job, that thought might run into the people that you have in government as Republicans, that you might be like, okay, well, they look a little disorganized, so maybe Republicans in government look a little disorganized. It's not necessarily true, but because the party puts its name on all of these things, they have to accept responsibility for what happens. And then the last is that they act as the organized opposition to the party in power. So even when your political party isn't in power, it is still the party's job to keep their message going, to keep talking about the things that they want to see. Rather than kind of hole up and wait for the next presidential election, political parties are often publishing new ideas and trying to gain more support so that when these things do roll around, they still look active. They don't look like they, hid away for a few years and came back. So it is their job to sort of act as the opposition party when they're not in power. Okay, so we need to talk about getting organized and the 3 main components of a party. First is the party and the electorate. If you don't know what the electorate means, it's the voting population. I am part of the electorate. I am a registered voter. You are not part of the electorate yet because you can't vote. But the electorate is sort of the public who can vote. Party organization we're going to talk about the structure of the party. And then party and government is how they influence or operate in government, okay? So party and the electorate and party and government are the 2 opposite sides, right? So party and the electorate, how are they talking to the people? Party and government, how are they talking to the people who actually make policy decisions? Party organization, hold on. Party organization. So this is a structural framework for the political party by recruiting volunteers to become party leaders, identifying potential candidates, organizing caucuses. So when we talk about party organization, how do they run? How do they function? How do they pull candidates out from the everyday people and put them on a platform? How do they find Barack Obama in the Illinois State Senate and they get him to the Senate and then they get him to the presidential? How do they do all of those things? How do they operate? One of the main tools that they use is what we call a national convention. Each party has a national convention every 4 years. And this is sort of like a big meeting of all of the people of that party. And there are a couple of different functions that convention will have. First and foremost, the convention is sort of a way to stir up conversations and support for their party. It's very public. They publicize it a lot. So a lot of people attend. But they also have what we call convention delegates. These are people from each state that come to represent their state. So Wisconsin delegates to the Republican National Convention are are kind of representing Wisconsin Republicans and what they'd like to see. In this meeting, the president and vice presidential candidates are officially nominated, and delegates adopt a party platform. So in this national convention, they're going to pick one, candidate that they want to run for their ticket. As far as the party platform goes, these are the things that the party believes, essentially. So they'll publish all of the things that the Democratic Party believes in this, or they're in favor of this, or they're opposed to this. It's sort of their outline of what they believe in. And that always gets addressed in the national convention. Now, do a lot of things change? No. Are there a lot of surprises? Not really. What they tend to do is sort of put it in writing, tailor it, so that it's very clear what the party platform is. Part of the issue with the party platform, though, is that the people who come to this national convention are the hardcore Democrats or Republicans. And so typically the party platform is extreme to whatever their party believes in. And so not a lot of people abide by the entire party platform. If you looked at the party platform of the party you think you believe in, odds are probably good you'll disagree with at least one or two of the issues. And that's really because most of us are moderate. We're not hardcore, skin and bones Republican or Democrat. We have our own thoughts and opinions. And so it doesn't mean that you have to abide by every single thing that the party platform says. It just is sort of an outline of here are the things that we believe in as this party. They also elect a national committee every 4 years. This would elect a chairperson, who's going to run the party, who's going to make decisions for the party, who's going to speak on behalf of the party, especially in the press. And then as well as the national committee, the committee sort of decides, where they're going to spend their money, where they're going to campaign, what candidates they want to look into for a potential presidential nominee, things like that. If you're interested in knowing, the national conventions for both parties will be coming up in 2016. They have a convention the year that a new presidential candidate is elected, and they typically do that because they have to nominate their candidate and because they really want to get their support up. So it'll happen this spring, 2016. The Democratic National Convention is going to be held in Philadelphia this year. It moves throughout the United States. And the Republican will be in Cleveland this year. They typically try and find cities that could use a big event. It brings a lot of economic prosperity to the city for that short amount of time. Lets people travel, stay in the city, go to restaurants and transportation and things like that. So cities really like to be a part of the national conventions because it means good things for their economy. State party organizations. So each state is a little different. There isn't sort of like a formula for how a state party is organized. Typically they have a chairperson. So the Wisconsin Republican chairperson is sort of the top dog of the Republican Party in the state. And then they typically have a committee, again, that kind of makes decisions together about where they're going to spend their money or how they're going to, what candidates they're going to support, things like that. State parties are really important when it comes to the Electoral College. Remember that in the Electoral College, when the state majority has spoken, all of the delegates of that state go to that one presidential candidate. Okay, so remember that it's not a public vote, it's a public vote to decide where your delegates will go. And so the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in states are very focused on that. Because if they can't get the public to vote, then all of the delegates are going to go to the other person. And so that's a really big piece of the state party organization. Local party organizations, they're not as influential in government. They don't tend to operate governmental offices on a local party level. What they're really designed for is to bring people together, to sort of give that incentive for people to come together and share their ideas, and sort of on a local level make some influence. One of the things we do come out of local party organizations that's pretty important is the idea of patronage. Patronage is where someone is rewarded for being a party faithful with government jobs or contracts. So this kind of moves up the ladder. If there's a local party organization and the leader of that has been a party faithful and has been good to the party, oftentimes they'll see, at some point a job come out that they're, nominated for or given because of their loyalty to the party. And sometimes they go further and further and further up to where they're in pretty influential positions. Okay. So this is a picture of the Republican National Convention. It's kind of a huge rally. Lots of people go, and there's lots of shouting, and it's like a multi-day event, and there are big speeches. I would highly encourage you to get on YouTube and search some of the speeches that have happened in some of these conventions. They're very interesting because the people who speak at these conventions are often future leaders in our government. For instance, in my American government class, I show a speech that President Barack Obama gave in 2004, before he'd even stepped into the national stage, essentially. He was asked to speak at the Democratic National Convention, and he gave a speech that is essentially what he believes in, right? So he's not running for president, he's not campaigning, he's simply talking about some of the ideals and his background and where he comes from, what's important to him. It's fascinating to sort of see where he came from. In a lot of these conventions, the keynote speakers are future candidates that the party's really looking at and trying to highlight, see what they do for the public, if they resonate with the people, if they're good at sort of appealing to the people. And Barack Obama did a fabulous job. It's one of the best speeches he's ever given in his career, and lots of people show it and analyze it because he did a really good job at it. But we see a lot of candidates who speak at these conventions who later become candidates. So it's something to sort of keep your eye on. It's certainly a nice highlight feature for the future of the party. Okay, so party and government. So we talked about party in the electorate, party in the everyday lives, the organization, and now party in government. What do the political parties do in government? They have a lot of power. Like I said before, they operate government. It is important that you have a party affiliation if you're a part of the government. It's how we sort of organize ourselves. Divided government is a situation in which one major political party controls the presidency and the other controls Congress. Currently, we are in a divided government. Currently, our Congress is run by a majority of Republicans in both the House and the Senate, and we have a Democratic president. What happens in divided government is things tend to slow way down. As you can imagine, in one party, in one branch, they are publishing bills and ideas that favor their party, but then it gets sent to the executive branch to be signed, and if that person is in a different party, they're typically not going to agree with what's been given to them. It allows for a lot of really good debate, good discussion, and a lot of times it allows for people to really make some good compromises. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened very often in the last 4 years. We've tended to see people really get stuck in their party affiliations, and so this divided government has sort of changed into basically a stalled government, where our government hasn't been doing as much as it should be doing because this divided government has become such an issue. However, political scientists do see that lots of the electorate tend to ticket split, and that will lead to a divided government. So ticket splitting is the practice of voting for one party in one area and voting for another party in another area. Basically, it's not voting along party lines. So, for instance, if I went to vote and I voted for a Democratic, president, but I voted for a Republican congressperson, and I'm essentially ticket splitting. I'm kind of creating a divided government. If more people do what I do, we'll have a divided government. Divided government or ticket splitting is good for 2 reasons in political science world. The first thing is that if someone ticket splits, it's a pretty clear indication that that person is voting based on the campaign and the ideals of the person, which is the ideal when it comes to voting. We want voters to vote based on what a candidate has campaigned on and what a candidate says they will do, not the party affiliation that's behind their name. We want to see more voters do that. Unfortunately, what we see voters do is get into the ballot box, take a look at the party, and check every box that the party is affiliated with, regardless of whether that candidate has really campaigned well or really aligned to your personal beliefs. So ticket splitting is essentially a good thing in the sense that we feel like then voters are really thinking about who they're voting for. It's also a good thing in the sense that divided government can be good for our country. We always look at divided government and think, oh, that's a bad thing. When government is divided, it means that we just need to have more conversation. It means that there's more analysis of the things that government publishes and decides. That can often be good. Unfortunately, it hasn't really happened lately where there hasn't been conversation, there's just been disagreement. There hasn't been any compromise. Limits of party unity, the book talks a little bit about, and I'm going to let the book do that for sake of timing. Party polarization. So this is essentially the idea that without the ability to work together, legislative action stalls, and the public is growing increasingly dissatisfied. Essentially, this party polarization is growing further and further and further to the point where it used to be that if you were a Republican or a Democrat, there were some things you agreed on. I know that that sounds radical, but yes, the parties were closer together, that if I was a Republican and my friend was a Democrat, there were a certain amount of things that we agreed on, that it didn't really matter in party politics. That gap has grown further and further and further apart, where now it's kind of the point where if I believe something as a Republican and my friend is a Democrat, she's going to believe exactly the opposite. We don't share anything in common very often anymore. The party polarization system, especially in the legislative branch, is continuing to get more and more entrenched because of what we call safe seats. These are seats, or districts that return a legislator with 55% of the vote or more, and they tend to send the same party legislator every single time. So this is done through gerrymandering. When we change district lines to favor a political party, that district continually sends the same candidate over and over and over again. What happens is that in Congress, we don't see a whole lot of change happen when elections happen. At this point, they say there's about 18 to 20 seats in our entire Congress that are actually up for change. All other districts, that's essentially 400 districts, are decided already. That politics can be decided before an election even happens. We can point to a district and say, they're sending a Democrat, they're sending a Republican, they're sending a Democrat, because they've gerrymandered the districts and because the party has become so polarized that things don't change very often. That's a big deal. When we only have 18 seats to play with in any Congress, it means that things are getting very much entrenched and there's not a whole lot of change happening. And that can mean really important things when it comes to trying to pass legislation. Okay, I'm going to go really quickly through this to keep you up to the first group. We are going to watch a crash course video on the history of political parties and the party system tomorrow. You're also going to do an activity on this on Wednesday, okay? So I'm going to go really, really quickly. You're going to be mad at me by the end. Just hang tight. You're going to get a lot more exposure to this. First and foremost, read the chapter. You know, this is a lot, okay? So we've divided it into different systems.
Morning. Do you have reading?
He was in the first group, so
Okay.
you should be with Miss Lang. So the first party system, this is the development of parties. It's from 1789 to 1829. 1789, 2 years after the Constitution has been ratified, it's the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. They kind of spark out of this debate about ratifying the Constitution and they run with it. So only 2 years after the Constitution is ratified do we see two parties already emerging, the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists included John Adams. They represent commercial interests. They're a little bit of a higher class. They're all of the founders, typically, who wrote the Constitution. They're white, landowning men. That's the Federalist Party. The Anti-Federalist is the opposite. It's the people, the common day people, the artisans, the farmers, the people who really favor states' rights. They want more power closer to them as opposed to a strong national government. Thomas Jefferson founds the Anti-Federalist Party. We move into what we call the era of good feelings. It's the era of personal politics. And essentially it's from 1817 to 1825 when James Monroe was president. And in essence, there's really no political opposition. James Monroe does a really good job. Most people tend to agree with what he does. We don't see a whole lot of debate here. The second party system comes in the mid-1820s. So organized two-party politics returns in 1824. John Adams runs under a group called the National Republicans. Andrew Jackson runs against him. He defeats Adams and he forms the Democratic Party. So this is where we see the Democratic Party emerge. Later, the National Republicans are going to take the name of the Whigs. So the National Republicans turn into the Whig Party. They stand for federal spending on internal improvements such as roads. If you know anything about the parties, the Republican Party, the Whig Party, standing up for internal spending is actually opposite of what our modern day Republican Party stands for. So one of the things I want you to really understand here is that the political parties switch many times in US history, okay? So if you hear someone say, I am a Democrat, and I've been a Democrat because the Democrats believed in what I believed in for the whole remainder of our country, they're wrong. The Democratic Party has actually switched their party system multiple times. They've switched their platform many, many times. Third party system is where the Republicans rise to power during the Civil War. This is about 1860 to 1896. Romanism and rebellion is where Northern Democrats fear a strong government, and Republicans thought the government should promote business and economic growth. Again, just switch your brain a little bit. Republicans are into having government help them in economic growth. Democrats are more like, whoa, why are you getting involved in all of these things? The Republicans triumph, and from 1896 to 1932, the Republicans are successfully able to present themselves as the party that knew how to manage the economy. Obviously, that's going to change in 1932 when we see the Great Depression really start to happen. So one of the things you have to realize is slavery really sparks this change, and the Great Depression is going to spark the next change. We've seen these big issues kind of change what the party is really looking like in a lot of instances. Fourth party system is the progressive interlude and the Republican dominance. Again, this is 1896 to 1932. It's a pretty quiet era. Republicans are continually making good decisions in the economy. However, in 1929, Herbert Hoover, who is a Republican, is president during the stock market exchange crash, and he decides that he's going to let the economy be. He thinks the economy will pop back to where they need to be without a lot of government help. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work, and so by 1932, the United States elects President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and we start to see this Democratic dominance. We also see the Democrats get a lot more involved in government. They believe that big government is helping. Again, this is a change from what they used to believe in. Okay, I'm gonna pause us there. We're not as far as the first group, but well, we're close enough, and I wanna get those papers back to you.